This is my Lovol TB554. It's a four-wheel drive tractor right from China. So I want to be clear, this is not a shill vid of any kind. I put my own money down on this tractor and I had expectations for this money. So I'm going to go through this tractor. I'll start with an overview of it and then I'll let you guys know if your expectations for your money will be met by this tractor. So this is a 2019 model, or at least if there is such a thing. It was built at the very tail end of 2019. Now I actually bought this direct from the manufacturer in China and I imported it myself. I believe when I bought this, the price on the tractor alone with the cab was about $15,000 US, and it was a little over $5,000 I think to get the whole thing shipped over. And I also got some implements and such. So I got the four-wheel drive version. I'm pretty sure you can get a two-wheel drive as well, or sorry, four-wheel assist if you want to be pedantic. I also got the cab with air conditioning and heat. There's not really much else for options. Now this loader, if you have the nor-trac XT455 version, you probably have a different loader. This is the same loader that they've been putting on Chinese tractors forever. I'm sure this goes back 20-30 years. I'll go over the loader in a little bit. Mostly it's just about the tractor, but I'll also go over the loader a bit just in case you have this same setup. The tractor itself, Lovol made a big deal about the big redesign that they did, and well, I mean, it's not. When you really get to the underpinnings, this tractor is exactly the same tractor that they were making 25 years ago or so. There's a few minor improvements, but it's mostly just the lipstick on a pig thing that you see in the front here. Otherwise, you go back to the mid-2000s and that Foton tractor is basically exactly the same as this thing. So, I don't know how deep I should go into all the options. You can probably find other videos online about that. It's a category 2 3-point hitch system. And the hydraulic system's a little odd. At least if you're used to more traditional tractors. That's the hydraulic tank right there. We'll go back to the front here. Right in there, that's the hydraulic pumps. So it's engine driven, it doesn't have anything in the transmission. The front one is for your power steering, and then there's a block that holds the two together, and the back piece there is your main pump. I kind of like that. I think as far as serviceability goes, that might be a good way to go. I always thought it was a little weird to have all your stuff inside the transmission. But this hydraulic tank is a bit problematic. Mostly this. Because, well, I don't know what they have as far as... There's like a little piece of paper that's supposed to keep it from spilling out or venting out. None of it works, and I mean, you look at the angle that this thing's on. I mean, obviously your level's at least about here, so you back up and hit the brakes and it starts sloshing out. So that's what happens, and you can kind of see it's a little oily all around here. That's just a normal part of this tractor. It's hydraulic fluid spilling out the cap. I mean, if they'd taken this and just gone up with it, that would probably solve the problem right there. But that's kind of annoying. I haven't played with these remotes. I will be soon though. This thing down here, I couldn't quite figure out what the deal was with it. This is supposed to be tied in with your lift arm system here. There's, I don't know if I can really get in here, right in the very back, right behind this tube, there's a little valve, and if you turn it one way, you open it up or whatever, then instead of raising the lift arms, you put hydraulic pressure to this. Now, I don't know if that's supposed to be constant or if it's just As far as, yeah, I don't know exactly how that works. I would assume it's probably a constant feed, but then you're going to have a return system, so you'd have to plumb that back into here. I'm not really sure what it's for. I'm sure there's some kind of Chinese implements that use that. You can see more of the lipstick here, LED lights. There were a lot of niggly things, like these grease fittings here are different because I put those in. This was just completely open, so you put grease in this hinge and it would squirt out the bottom. Quality control stuff like that. They fit, so that just blocks it off. This little cap was missing. Nothing too big, nothing too major, but you know, it's quality control stuff. It's got a plastic fuel tank, which I like. That's a good thing to have. Well, up there is a filter. It's actually got a cabin air filter here. So this is supposedly a Grammer seat. Grammer is a German company that makes good quality stuff. I couldn't find this exact seat model on their website, but it could just be a super cheap bespoke seat made by them. You never know. The interior is kind of sparse. I'll try and get inside here and give you a better view. Everything in here is kind of just chintzy plastic. Everything's very cheap. But, I mean, it's a tractor, so who really cares? It has a handbrake, so yeah, I don't like that stuff. I don't know, Chinese equipment, they love to have handbrakes, but then the guy jumps in and forgets to turn it off, and now you're doing brakes. This is your four-wheel drive lever. PTO speed. We got the fuse box back in here. I'll say the wiring is a little improved over what you'd expect from the old Chinese stuff, but it's still not really up to par. The stereos, utter crap. I installed this one. It's also a cheap Chinese stereo, but it was a lot better than what was in here. What was in here had speakers here, and like, you couldn't even hear it when it was running, even full crank. So I put a couple of these speakers in, and I put some kickers in there. And then rewired everything all properly, so at least now you can hear music over the tractor. This is your 3-point lift, transmission gears, transmission range. These are for the remotes. Like I say, I haven't really played with that yet. Got buttons for lights and signals, which you don't really use much around here. Shuttle shift, forward and reverse. This is the joystick for the loader. It's all cable operated, so it's kind of old school and hokey. Little sunroof. The HVAC system is a joke. This does nothing. I haven't found anything that it changes. And you can sort of set, I guess, how cold it is in here by this. And this is your fan speed. As far as changing it from heat to AC, that's where it gets really hokey. So we'll take a look under the hood, and first we'll talk about the heat AC situation. If I can get a good look-see at it without the panel off. Well, you can't really because I got it covered in tape right now. There's a manual little knob turning type dealie. It's super stiff, it's super hokey, and it's super problematic. And the way that you turn on the air conditioning is you close that valve. That's it. That's seriously it. You have to open your hood and crank over a valve to get your AC working. And then you open it back up when you want heat. So there's tape and a bottle, and I'm going to go over that later. It's a disaster. The engine itself is excellent because it's not Chinese. This is a Japanese engine. It's a real deal. It's a Shibara engine. NL4D, I think, is the designation. It has a DPF back there. It has the cutest, tiniest little turbo I've ever seen in my life. And this is a 4-cylinder, I believe, little diesel. Supposedly 55 horsepower. I have my doubts, but that's what they say it is. And it's even got an intercooler. Shibara, they've been around since the 40s or 50s. They put engines into all kinds of stuff, American stuff, European stuff, so they know how to build an engine. The reason it's in here is that if you live in an emissions control country, the Chinese engines that these things normally come with don't pass emission standards. So you're going to get this engine instead. It's a much better engine. And yeah, it's probably the best part of the tractor. They did make some concessions. This tractor wasn't designed for this engine. So let me show you some of those. You can see where the Japanese stuff stops and the Chinese stuff starts, eh? Like, wow, that is some excellent stuff right there. So right here is where the exhaust dumps, pretty much right on this loader valve. And that's not where it normally dumps. You can see there's a bracket right here. If you've got the engine that this tractor is designed for, then the exhaust comes up. It comes up through here and up, and you got a stack. But that's not the way this exhaust routes, however you want to say that. And I can't really show you this, but there's these little tabs that this side panel sits in, and you can see this is flopping around. Well, in order to clear this exhaust, they had to cut it off. And if I take this panel off, you can see that it literally looks like they just took the angle grinder to it and called it a day. They didn't clean it up, they didn't come up with a new mounting system, nothing. It's just flapping in the breeze. So that's some good quality right there. But hey, at least the engine's good. So when I was looking at buying one of these, I searched all over for reviews of guys that had one of these supposedly new low-vol tractors, and I just couldn't find anything. So I guess this is the review that I was looking for. There's some issues. If you have experience with Chinese stuff, especially equipment, a lot of this is going to be familiar. There's problems that they just haven't figured out how to address. You know, honestly, the biggest issue I have with Chinese stuff is that they just can't wrap their head around the fact that quality is not a word. Quality is a thing. You can say all over the internet that you have it, but if you don't have it, you don't have it. Some things aren't too bad, some things are unforgivable. So let's start with the cooling system. The cooling system on this thing is a joke and a disaster, and they didn't want to hear about it. So I guess I'll start with this valve here. You can see I've got a Coke bottle kind of jerry-rigged up there. I've got a hose, and that's catching all the coolant that's coming out of that valve that you used to switch from AC to heat. That valve's finished, and this tractor's not that old. It doesn't have that many hours. You know, 153 or whatever it is, 154 hours. I would expect that valve to last a lot better. It's only been used a few times. Switch it over for the summer, switch it over for the winter. So I'm going to have to come up with a completely different setup, something that'll actually work. And well, it pisses me off so much because they didn't even think to put that valve, at the very least, if they weren't going to build a valve that works properly, they had to put it directly above the alternator. So that's not the original alternator. I put that alternator in, and what a nightmare it was just to find an alternator for this thing. That valve leaked all over the friggin' alternator and burned it out. So, just why? Like, what a pathetic oversight. But that's not all of it. If you guys know anything about how automotive cooling systems work, there's the old school type used to be where it would vent to the ground, especially in agricultural stuff. So you had your cap that was rated to pop off at a certain pressure, and if it did pop off, then it would spill to the ground. and I don't even think that's a legal system in any kind of North American, European country, but maybe I'm wrong on that. This is not that kind of cap. There's a different cap for a different system. This is a typical system where it allows some bypass, so it allows expansion and contraction of the cooling system. In order to use this kind of cap though, you need a coolant reservoir. You can say I have one. That's not what it came with. All this hokey zap strap and stuff. I got this thing out of a Geo Metro or something like that. I first found out about this problem when I noticed there was coolant coming out of that tube, as there will be, because that's a bypass cap. It's always going to be bypassing coolant until you run out, which, I mean, you can figure out what happens then. This works great. It pushes it in and then it pulls it back out. It works absolutely wonderfully. But I did this. I had to do this. And if you have this tractor, you're going to have to do it too. I emailed them. I emailed Lovol about this. And they were just like, oh no, you're just a stupid guilo. You don't understand how things work. So everything's fine. Don't worry about it. That was literally their response. They didn't even care. They didn't want to hear about it. That's a scary kind of response to get from a company that's trying to bust into more Western markets with a piece of equipment, because you need to be on top of this kind of thing. They're not. I'll give them some credit for the cooling system. It does actually work wonderfully with the cooling bot or the coolant reservoir in there. It works great, but I shouldn't have had to do any of that. And you buy a new tractor, it should be ready to rumble. Another problem, I guess that's one of the big problems. There's two big problems. The other big problem is the transmission. This transmission has never worked properly. It's always been hard to get into gear. It grinds sometimes. It's an absolute bugger to work with. You're not going to be going back and forth very quickly with this transmission. Now, I've changed the oil in it twice now, and that seems excessive for something that only has 150 something hours on it. But the reason is, when I first drained it, there was a lot of metal on the plug. There's actually two places to drain it. There's a sump in here, and then underneath the diff there's another plug, and that plug under the diff has a magnet on it. That magnet was caked in metal, so I flushed everything out and I refilled the system, and I decided I just wanted to be extra sure. So I don't know what it was, maybe 15-20 hours ago I changed it again. Same thing, metal all over the plug. So we got a transmission that's clunky and grindy and constantly puts metal on the magnet. I don't think this transmission is going to live a very long life. And I don't know what I'm going to do when the transmission does go on this thing, because, man, getting parts for this is going to be something else. When I originally bought this, I was a little disappointed that they didn't have a hydrostatic transmission option. But I gotta say, if they can't even put together a regular gear transmission properly, what kind of a disaster would an HST be? I also noticed that the power steering system just hisses constantly. It's very, very noisy. I'm not sure why that is. I'm not a hydraulic expert, but I don't think it should be as noisy as it is. Another thing I forgot to mention about the cooling system was a bunch of the hoses. They actually didn't put the hose clamps on right. Some of them were misplaced and some of them weren't tight. So I had to reposition and retighten a lot of hose clamps here. By the way, that coolant heater did not come with the tractor. It didn't come with anything. I was kind of surprised. You're going to ship a tractor out to Canada and it's going to have no kind of coolant heating. I guess the last issue is the leaks. It hasn't been as bad on the tractor as the loader, but it's hard to tell now actually because of the rain. It just rained, so everything's a little bit cleaner than it normally is. But a lot of the hydraulic lines and hoses have little weeps in them already. And it's a couple years old and 150 something hours. Why, oh why have hydraulic hoses leaking? Now this thing especially is bad. This will leave little droplets and little puddles on the ground. I've checked, everything's tight. I did have some issues on the loader originally that some of the lines weren't tight, and that fixed it until it stopped being fixed. So I guess we should talk about the loader as well. It's a loader. It's not a great loader, but it does work. Came with a ridiculously tiny bucket, and they refused to put a bigger bucket on it. It does come with these auxiliary remotes here, whatever you want to call them. So I could run a grapple on this thing, which is pretty handy. The fork cylinders, these things are weak as frig. Now this thing will lift a lot. I've actually had the back end of this thing up in the air before. It'll lift, but the fork cylinders, they don't play ball well. It'll only come straight up. So this lever here, like I say, it's all cable activated. It's pretty hokey. There's actually a button on the top. You can't really tell that it's there. There's nothing here, but it's there. So basically what that does is it activates this thing right here, and then it takes the juice that it would be sending over to these, and it sends it to this. So that is nice, but you know, you can sort of get a feel for the general assembly of it. It is a loader, and well, I guess something that's kind of amusing here is how it's so not designed for this engine. Let's see if we can find that thing. It's right down there. That's where the oil dipstick is, so you gotta do some crazy gymnastics routine to get that thing out from behind this big honking frame. So after spending a couple years with this thing, would I recommend it to anyone? That's a real tough call. I think for most people I would say no. Stay the hell away from this thing. It's going to be more headaches than you're willing to deal with. I can guarantee it. It's not terrible. I mean, it's done a fair bit of work, and I haven't been overly gentle. I do maintain it, but I haven't been overly gentle on it. I use it. And it's done everything I've asked it to so far. I do think the transmission is going to become a serious issue in the future. And I guess my opinion will probably fall when that happens. There are some ridiculous things, unforgivable. The cooling system is just, it's unforgivable. You guys should do a better job of this. You know, compared to all the competition, you are going to save a decent amount of money buying this tractor. I did save a lot of money. I saved probably $20,000 to $30,000 over the whole kit when I bought everything. But every single implement I bought has needed a substantial amount of work just to become usable. And as you can see, the tractor's just got kind of constant niggling issues. I'm sure that that coolant situation, the coolant valve there, it's just getting worse. I'm going to have to fix it. I'm going to upgrade it as well. I'll just get an electric solenoid valve like it should have come with from the factory, that I can just switch it from inside the cab. And then I think the cooling system will be finally sorted, but that's just unbelievable. Replacing valves, fixing coolant hoses, installing a coolant bottle because they've got two different systems mashed together. And then you've got that hydraulic bottle, the hydraulic tank, that's constantly spilling out. Just from poor design more than anything else. I would say that if you have experience with Chinese equipment and you are capable of doing a lot of repairs and modifications yourself, if you're willing to sacrifice the experience that you should get with a new piece of equipment in order to save some money, this could be your tractor. I just didn't have the extra money, and so I did that. I was willing to sacrifice that experience. You're not going to have a dealer. You're not going to have somebody coming out to fix this thing for you. You're not even going to get parts within the next couple days. It's going to take you a couple weeks to get parts. And if you can't afford that kind of downtime and you're not willing to do that kind of work, this just isn't your tractor. So in general, I don't recommend this tractor. So I hope this video was reasonably informative, and if there's anything you're curious about that I haven't covered, the tractor's not going anywhere, so just ask me. Leave a comment down in the bottom and I will get back to you.